evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm calling to order this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the town of Oakville. And I'm going to look to council for declarations of pecuniary interest, and Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a note on item number 7. I do have an immediate family member who is a real estate agent in town, which would be impacted by the signed bylaw restrictions. But as it's not a pecuniary interest at stake, I will still be voting on it. But just for transparency's sake, I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
It's not your fault, but no one on council could understand what you said. So we're going to have a little technical adjustment.
Okay, is that better there?
On the other side.
Is it?
They're saying talk so close to
Okay.
your mic and see if that helps. And
Okay.
do you have one of those little things?
I do have. Maybe
Turn
turn
it
this
down a
down.
little bit?
I don't think that's a possibility, but anyway. Is this better now? Can Councillor Knoll, can you hear now? Perfect. Just on item number 7, I do have an immediate family member who is a real estate agent in town, but as I don't believe there's any pecuniary interest in the item we're dealing with, but for transparency's sake, I just wish to have that noted for the record.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? All right. We need a mover and seconder to resolve in the committee of the whole. Councillor Dudek, Councillor Elgar, all in favor? And that's carried. The first agenda items, we have consent items. The first one I'll call is the assumption of subdivision 20M 989 North Maroke Developments Phase 1 south of Dundas east of 8th line. This is a report from the Development Engineering Department, and the matter to be moved is the assumption of the registered plan and the assumption of the public works and streets within the plan. And I'll look over in the direction of Ward 6. Ah. Item number 1 is moved by Councillor Adams. Does anyone want to dare to use the sound system for comment? Shall I put the vote? All those in favor? Thank you, everybody. That carries. The second consent item is the assumption of subdivision 20M North Maroke Developments Phase 2 south of Dundas east of 8th line. And it's the same thing, assumption. And Councillor Lischina moves this one. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that consent item is adopted. And now we have the H holding provision removal for Sagita Construction as listed in item 3 in the agenda. And who wants to move that? Councillor Chisholm. All those in favor? And that is carried. Item 4 is the H holding provision removal from MGO in North Oakville. And this is as listed in the agenda. And if you require it, Heinz Hecht is here with a presentation. No call for a presentation, but no motion either. Councillor Adams is giving us a motion. All those in favor? That carries. Thank you, everybody. That finishes the public consent items, and now we have the confidential consent item. Council has a confidential report from the legal department, and I'm looking for a motion that the staff be authorized to proceed in the appeals to the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal related to OPA 321 and related matters in accordance with the report from the legal department. Councillor Dudek moves approval. All those in favor? And that is, any opposed? That's carried. How much can I announce? I can say what we're doing now, right? Mm-hmm. Mr. Carr, perhaps I'll turn to you to explain what we're doing on this, and because I think it's important, and I think the public will be pleased to know about it.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. If I might, I'd like to call on my colleague Nadia Chandra, who could speak to that.
Good evening through you, Mayor Burton and members of council. This was a legacy appeal for Minto development. And what we're doing with OPA 321, basically they need a site-specific exception from those policies in order to implement the settlement previously authorized by council.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Council, we now turn to the public hearing item number 5, the public meeting report for official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 393 Dundas. And we have a presentation from Melissa Dalrymple.
Thank you, Mayor Burton and members of council. The report can be found on page 35 of tonight's agenda. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to obtain input from the public and council related to this application. No recommendations on the application are proposed tonight. This air photo shows the subject lands in context with the surrounding area. The subject lands are located on the north side of Dundas Street West, east of Gladeside Avenue, and west of George Savage Avenue. The lands maintain an area of 1.64 hectares with approximately 120 meters of frontage along Dundas Street West. The lands are currently vacant. The Shannon's Creek Channel traverses the east boundary of the site. I hear like an echo. Sorry.
I'm now closer.
Okay.
Try a few tests.
Test? Are we okay? Okay. So as I was saying, this air photo shows the subject lands in context with the surrounding neighborhood, as well as an application for 407 Dundas Street West, which is located north and... Okay.
I have good news and bad news. The good news is they're going to fix it. The bad news is we're going to have a 5-minute recess while they do that.
The south is Dundas Street West, and to the north and west is a development that's municipally known as 407 Dundas Street West. This development received recent council approval in August 2018 to permit an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment to allow a mixed-use development, similar to what's being proposed under 393. So what you see here is a 10-story mixed-use building at the corner of Trailside Drive and Dundas Street West, subject to bonusing, as well as 36 stacked townhouse dwellings and townhouse dwellings further north on Trailside Drive. The boundaries of the subject application are denoted by the red outline. The subject application consists of a 10-story mixed-use building containing 290 residential units and 275 square meters of ground floor commercial space, as well as 15 stacked townhouse units. The proposed 10-story mixed-use building is located at the intersection of Dundas Street West and Trailside Drive, with a block of the stacked townhouses located further north on Trailside. The design of the building transitions from 10 stories at the intersection to 8 stories, 5 stories, and 2 stories at the north end of the building. The 10-story building also includes 275 square meters of ground floor commercial space fronting onto Trailside Drive. A surface parking lot is provided behind the mixed-use building, and access to the surface parking lot and underground parking is provided by a driveway off of Trailside Drive. This slide shows a view of the proposed 10-story building from the perspective of Dundas Street and Trailside Drive. This shows a view of the proposed building from Dundas Street West. and this shows a view of the stacked townhouses looking south on Trailside Drive. In order to permit the proposed development, an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment are required. The North Oakville East Secondary Plan and the North Oakville Master Plan designate and identify the site as Dundas Urban Core Area and Natural Heritage System. In addition, the lands front onto Dundas Street, which is identified as a major arterial and transit corridor. The purpose of the official plan amendment is to amend the North Oakville East Secondary Plan, creating a site-specific exception to increase the maximum building height from 8 stories to 10 stories, and to increase the maximum FSI from 2.5 to 2.69, implemented through bonusing. Council adopted amendments to the North Oakville East Secondary Plan in June 2018 through OPA 321, which included changes to the Dundas Urban Core policies. Under OPA 321, a maximum building height of up to 12 stories is permitted in certain locations in exchange for community benefits where it's determined to be appropriate and subject to the town's bonusing procedure. OPA 321 was approved with modifications by the Halton Region in September 2018 and is currently under review of the LPAT, or under appeal to the LPAT. The subject official plan amendment is in accordance with OPA 321, meaning we would not require an OPA if OPA 321 was in full force. The subject property is zoned existing development in the North Oakville zoning bylaw, which allows only uses that legally existed on the date of the bylaw coming into effect. The purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment is to rezone the lands from existing development to Dundas Urban Core and Natural Heritage System. The proposed Dundas Urban Core zone includes a site-specific special provision to implement the proposed site layout, as well as a holding zone to deal with matters such as regional servicing allocation and registration of a bonusing agreement. A combined public information meeting was held on March 1st, 2018, which was attended by 6 residents. A number of concerns were raised by residents, and they included concern for the negative impacts of increasing the building height from 8 stories to 10 stories, concern that the existing land use permissions in the Dundas Urban Core allowed for an 8-story building height, concern for the impacts of increased traffic and traffic safety, as well as concern for the availability of school accommodation. To date, no additional comments have been submitted in response to the notice of complete application or the notice of this public meeting for the subject lands. The application is under review, and a complete analysis of the following matters is taking place. Feedback from public and council provided at tonight's meeting, results of the technical review, consistency and conformity with provincial and regional plans, regard for policies related to urban structure implementation contained in Livable Oakville, an assessment of the development in relation to the policies of the North Oakville East Secondary Plan, including consistency with the policies of the Dundas Urban Core Area, evaluation of the amount of floor area proposed for commercial uses, the impact and interface of the proposed built form with the existing and planned neighborhood context, as well matters related to the zoning bylaw amendment and bonusing are being reviewed. Again, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to obtain input from members of the public and council in order to provide council the opportunity to make a decision within the time frame for official plan amendments. Staff will be presenting a recommendation report at the Planning and Development Council meeting of February 11th, 2018. In conclusion, staff put forth the following recommendation as shown for council's consideration.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dalrymple. Council, do you have questions? Councillor Elgar.
Thanks very much for the presentation. You mentioned it's 1.64 hectares, the property. How much of that property is natural heritage system?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't have that number, but I can report back at the recommendation stage.
I'm trying to figure out the density.
Oh,
When I look at, well, the density on the area that is developable, not on the total parcel, is what I was looking at.
through you, Mr. Mayor, the density is approximately 291 units per net hectare.
Per net hectare, which excludes the NHS property?
No, I'm sorry, that would
It in-
exclude the road.
It
point.
includes the NHS property, right?
That would include the NHS property.
So when you look at this property, it all looks good on paper until you bring in the people in their cars. My concern here is we got 290 units, 15 townhouses for a total of 305 units. But when I look at the parking, it doesn't look sufficient when I see there's only 289 spaces of the 290 units. There's only 289 spaces for individual residents. In the 15 units that are townhouses, they only have one parking spot each. Does that include like there's no garage, or the parking is the garage, even in the townhouses? Because what I'm experiencing, and I think a number of other councillors are experiencing also, is everybody moves in and there's no place to park, and they're looking for places to park, and it's turning into a bit of a disaster for us in the newer parts of Oakville. So I'd like to know how would you think going forward we should address this? I know it's supposed to be a higher order of transit along Dundas, but if you recall, the money for that higher order of transit has now gone to, hopefully, get the money from the province for the Wycroft Bridge, which is supposed to be our quick hit, but we don't have the money for that yet either from the province. So I'm just concerned that we bring the people, but then there's no place to park. And I know in another location in the northwest corner of my ward, a parking spot is now $67,000 if you can get one. And that in a small town, in a small condo development. So when the report comes back, if we could address that, I would really appreciate it, because parking to me, it's a huge issue for the councillors after the fact, and then we have no way of solving it. And so I'm very concerned about that going forward. So if in the report that was addressed, I'd be really pleased. And I don't know at this point about underground parking. We've also got locations where a mother can only bring her children up to the ground level through the ramp of a parking garage, because there's no elevator and you can't push a stroller up the steps. So those are things, if we can look at those going forward, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you for the comment.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Knoll.
Just a very brief comment to emphasize or to reiterate what Councillor Elgar was saying, that that particular part of my former ward, our former ward, now our friend's ward, is already overtaxed in terms of parking. There is no parking anywhere on the streets. So, I mean, it's a very important point, and I do look forward to the response to that, not just for this particular proposal, but an overall review of the parking strategy for North Oakville, because it's a huge issue.
Councillor Grant.
And not to bang the same drum over and over again as I have before, but again, we are ignoring the fact that people who do live in these places do have visitors, do have family, do have people who want to come and stay with them. And so it's very disappointing that we have these buildings built, and the visitor parking spaces, the spaces that people can have to have their families join them, are not available to them. So while it's nice that we're getting all these new structures, I'm really concerned that we are not yet getting the parking for all those groups.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hazard-Thiel.
Could I just ask about the building that will be behind or beside it? Just in terms of the comment about shadowing, could when you come back at least explain or show how that impacts those that'll be behind it? It strikes me that the way I'm looking at the plan, and maybe it's just the visualization of it, there may be a disadvantage to those that are behind, and I'm sure you can clarify that for us.
Thank you. As part of the recommendation report, we can certainly get into details about the sun shadowing study that was submitted as part of the application.
Thanks very much.
Councillor Palmer.
Turn this? Oh, okay. I'm interested in knowing how many properties actually it says here, were provided through a mailing to all properties within 120 meters of the subject property. I'm just curious, how many properties does that actually count for?
Through
How many
you, Mr.
residents were
Mayor.
advised?
I would have to double check and report back with the recommendation report. Given the number of units that are in a number of homes that are in the area, it would be quite a few.
Excuse me, Councillor Sanju.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a general question, and maybe something that you need to come back with as well. When we speak about FSI and the ratio change from 2.5 to 2.69, can you help us understand why that ratio is increasing and what that means to the development and also the land and the land use for that area?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. What's interesting is that as part of OPA 321, which were amendments to the North Oakville Plan, we dispensed with the idea of FSI in favor of minimum density, which was then amended by the region. So should OPA 321 be approved, should the appeal be dealt with under the LPAT, and should it be approved as is, we won't be using FSI as a measure of density moving forward, but what FSI measures is a measure of the area of a lot versus the amount of built form on that lot. It's the measurement of, so it's a ratio between the lot area and the amount of floor area proposed.
All righty. Are there any registered delegations? Oh, Councillor Adams.
Sorry, just further on this issue of the parking, I noticed that in the following item, number 6, the parking provision is a 1.35 spaces per unit in the apartment, and I think the provision in this one is more like 1.2 something. So there's clearly, on the same stretch of road, we can have different numbers, so I invite that comparison.
Councillor Grant.
Sorry, just to dovetail on this, this is now the 7th thing I think that we've seen where everything north of Dundas has a parking problem. I'm wondering if we can put staff direction at this point to see if we can change the parking restrictions or change the parking areas for north of Dundas. Staff direction instead of having to go through a whole other process.
Well, you can direct staff any way that you can get a majority of council to agree with, but North Oakville is covered by an official plan, and you can't amend it by staff direction. So it depends on what you want to do exactly. Why don't we let the commissioner get a piece of this?
If the commissioner can help us.
I'll try. Can you hear me? Mayor and members of council, we are looking at 3 different types of issues to bring you back something on the parking. One is a review of things that we could do immediately to look at the applications we have in front of us to bring some relief to a question that you've asked at many meetings. The second is an overall review of the parking strategy in North Oakville and how we can proceed in the longer term with looking at all of our regulatory requirements, our permits, all that package of tools we have to deal with parking. And the third is to look more broadly at our transportation strategies in terms of how we can provide for transportation within North Oakville, which in part addresses the parking as a product of cars. And so how can we better address some of those strategies so it could have the longer term potential of reducing the use of the automobile within North Oakville. So those are the 3 strategies: immediate, a midterm, and a longer term strategy. We hope to bring those back to you early, the first early in 2019. The other 2 will be a little bit later in 2019.
Well, thank you very much for that. I've been dealing with this mostly colloquially, I'm very pleased that we have our Ward 7 residents now, or Ward 7 councillors, who probably deal with this every day. So I'm sure they'll keep the hammer down on that.
Madam Clerk, are there any delegations known to you?
No, there are no registered delegations.
Are there members of the public with information for council on this matter? Oh, excuse me, Councillor Sandu.
I'm so sorry. Just one more question. I just need a little bit more clarity on the FSI piece. So you're saying that the FSI is going to be increased from 2.5 to 6.9 and implemented through bonusing. I think that's where I'm stuck. I don't understand what that means. Can you help me understand that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Is it the bonusing piece? Okay, so bonusing is a planning tool that's permitted under Section 37 of the Planning Act. Got it.
What I'm struggling with is understanding how the ratio changes based on the bonusing.
So bonusing, a municipality can entertain the idea of bonusing to increase density. So FSI is a measure of density or height. Does that help? No? Does anyone else?
So if maybe, and this may be another discussion piece, but help me understand how the ratio is calculated and then how bonusing adds to that calculation.
Pardon? Through this application, what you would be getting is 2 more stories through bonusing.
So with the addition of the 2 more stories, that increases the FSI?
That's right.
All righty then. Okay, thank you. Are there members of the public with information for council on this matter? Yes, sir. Would you like to come to the podium, introduce yourself, and share your information?
Hello, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'm a resident of this area in North Oakville, and recently also involved in the boundary review of the school with the Northeast Oakville. And we see every day the same issue of the traffic school, especially around Odinawi Public School, on the part of school council as well. And we get the issues every month about parking, and now people don't park because there's no parking there, they get ticket. So it's an ongoing issue, so I'm happy to see that, Councillor Ellett raised that issue over here. Parking is a big issue. It's not only that, like in the traffic is the big issue. School doesn't have enough parking, so teachers have to get the permit from the school, which is already overcrowded. There's 60 teachers who school bought the permit for to park, and people who are resident who bought the permit, they are pissed off because, sorry, pardon my language, but they are really upset about that because now they don't get the park in front of their house because teachers are parking over there. So parking arrangement need to be done. Something have to be come out with that because this is the issue which is not making pretty place for the North Oakville.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else? I think it's safe to say council's in violent agreement with you. All right, so council, we are now ready for a motion to receive the information that council and the public have provided, and we're going to add a piece to this resolution. Mark Simeone, the planning director, is going to add a piece to identify the issues that the planners will consider in addition to what you have in the report. This is part of our standard procedure for these public information meetings. Mr. Simeone.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we will add an additional section to the resolution that says the analysis of the following matters of interest to council be included as part of the recommendation to the report. I know we spoke tonight about the sufficient amount of parking. I also understand there's issues of parking layout and how parking will be managed. And we use the example of somebody coming up from the parking garage. So we need a better understanding of how it's going to operate. We were asked to look into shadowing, particularly buildings behind. I take that to mean buildings to the north, so the shadowing to the north. How many properties were notified in the 120-meter notice range? We'll get back to you in the context of the report. There wasn't a question around floor space index, and we'll make sure that we have that covered in case there's any further questions on that. And the gentleman, these are issues that were raised by council. So there's issues of parking, unit count, and it relates to density and also traffic. And I just heard from an area resident who again reiterated the concerns around parking, traffic, and wants us to have good due regard for that in the final staff report.
Can I offer a bonus item? I'm concerned that the province isn't keeping up with the number of schools required for the people that we're approving in North Oakville. And I want to know if we can deploy some kind of tool to mark some time until they catch up, because they're way behind. Like, is it legitimate to have a holding provision until the necessary schools are in place, for example? I mean, what can we do to try to make sure that complete communities are more than just a promise in the province's growth plan?
Thank you, Your Worship. So definitely we were interested in complete communities. We'll have a thorough analysis of that for you in the context of the returning staff report.
Councillor Elgar?
Yeah, the one other item would be the property is 1.64 hectares. I would like also to separate how much is natural heritage system going forward, so that becomes a standard practice, so that we know whenever there's an application, how much of it is really developable. Be helpful. Maybe, for this one it's small maybe, but some could be bigger as we keep creeping to the north.
Sure.
Thank you.
Information's always good. Councillor Grant?
Sorry, pardon me, I couldn't quite hear. Are we approving this then without actually thinking about, well, are we discussing this without thinking about the parking situation? It doesn't, again, I didn't quite hear properly, but.
So we're not approving it.
Yes.
We're adding to the issues for the planners to consider
Yes.
in what their recommendation will be. And in theory, I may be hoping too much here, but in theory, we might see a requirement for more parking. I'm not sure, but it sounds to me like we have a belief at this desk that there's insufficient parking here, or in North Oakville generally, perhaps.
Forgive me, yes, it is a recommendation, not an approval report, so I get that. Thank you.
So you're good? Okay. So, so this is a motion for receipt of the information, just for everybody's clarity, not approval of the project, and further is a motion to receive the comments and also to direct staff to consider the comments that they've received. So not a decision yet. Everybody good on that? Shall I put the vote? I need a motion in order to put a vote. Councillor Palmer, thank you for moving the receipt. All those in favor? Opposed if any, and that is carried. All right. Now we have the other kind of planning report that follows a session like this one, which was just a public information part. This is the recommendation report for the zoning bylaw amendment for the Oakville urban core developments at 1005 Dundas Street and 3033 8th Line, which may be illuminated by Heinz Hecht, and I'm pretty sure that's in Ward 6. So away we go. Mr. Hecht.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. Item number 6 is a recommendation report for a proposed zoning amendment application to permit the development of an 8-story apartment building, including 23-story townhouses. The subject site is located at the northeast corner of Dundas Street East and 8th Line. To the west is a subdivision currently under construction, which includes a variety of housing forms, including three-story towns, as well as apartment buildings, three-story towns, as well as an apartment and townhouse uses along the Dundas Street corridor. The site is set back approximately 64 meters from the residential uses to the south, which includes the Dundas Street road allowance, as well as a 15-meter landscape buffer under town ownership. Just in terms of the official plan, the North Oakville East Secondary Plan designates the lands along the Dundas Street frontage as Dundas Urban Core, and the lands to the north are designated Neighborhood Center Area. These land use designations would permit the apartment and townhouses subject to a zoning amendment, which is before council tonight. The town's urban structure plan identifies the lands along the Dundas Street corridor as being within a system of nodes and corridors, which is also identified as a regional transit priority corridor, where transit supportive densities are intended to be located. The subject lands are zoned existing development. The proposed zoning bylaw has been drafted to reflect the concept plan, which is before council. The proposed zoning would establish a site-specific Dundas Urban Core zoning category with regulations related to setbacks. It would also establish a maximum height of 8 stories for the apartment building adjacent to Dundas Street and permit the 3-story townhouses. It would also permit a total of 344 parking spaces for the entire development, which includes 64 visitor parking spaces. A holding provision has also been established as part of this development to ensure that municipal services are available prior to development occurring. That concludes my presentation. Your Worship, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there questions? Councillor Adam.
Could staff just describe a little bit more of the shadowing study work that was done?
One of the issues, through you, Your Worship, one of the issues that was identified at the statutory public meeting was shadow impacts. The shadow impact analysis looks at the impact of development would have on the public and private realm. There are guidelines that indicate that shadow impacts from a proposed development should not exceed 2 consecutive hours after 12 p.m. on 4 days of the month, of the year. And that would be April 21st, June 21st, September 21st, and December 21st. So the shadow impact study looks at that, and with respect to this particular development, it was determined that that the shadow impacts are within the limits permitted by the town's shadow study analysis or guidelines. There would be, if you look at specifically what the impacts would be at those 4 days of the year, there's a 1-hour impact in April between 6 and 7 p.m. In June, there's a 2-hour impact between 6 and 8. It's September 21st, a 1-hour impact between 5:30 and 6:30 p.m., and no impact at all on December 21st. So to conclude, the shadow impact study was revisited, and it was determined that the impacts were within the range that would be permitted with the terms of reference for shadow studies.
Any others? All right, thank you. Are there members of the public with information for council on this file? Going once, going twice. I'm sorry? We can't make out what you're saying. Why don't you come up and ask your question at the microphone?
The question is the size of the lot, the area, and it's 1.09 hectares. in size. Or sorry, 255 units for the apartment and 20 units for the townhouses, so 344 parking spaces.
All righty. Anyone else? All right, I'll confine it to table and look for a motion. Councillor Adams moves a motion as prepared in the agenda. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is carried. We now go to the hot item of the night, the signed bylaw review. And to judge by all the friendly real estate faces I see in the crowd, there may be some interest in this item. And there's the proof. We are going to turn our attention to Selena Campbell, and she is going to summarize where we are on this for the public. I assure you, Council has read all the reports very carefully, but away we go.
Thank you, and good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of Council. I'm here to speak to item number 7 on tonight's agenda, the signed bylaw review. Before we get started, though, I wanted to just mention that there's a memo provided to you tonight identifying updates to the report and bylaw, including an addition of an effective date of January 1st, 2019 for the bylaw, and an update to the amendment fees on Schedule A. So in October of 2016, Council directed staff to undertake a signed bylaw review. The review was intended to be a comprehensive and collaborative effort between multiple departments, external stakeholders, businesses, and interested parties. Since that time, staff have held multiple consultations in the form of a public questionnaire, public meetings, focus group meetings. Information gathered has been used to develop the signed bylaw proposed tonight. The signed bylaw review had several important objectives, being a comprehensive look at the town's bylaws, other municipal bylaws, the industry, and community needs, to achieve consistent regulations across the town, be a collaboration with all interested parties, have signs that are compatible with surrounding land uses, and to consult with interested parties, be customer-focused, and to use consultants as subject matter experts when needed. Council also established some guiding principles for the project: ensuring public health and safety, maintaining community character, contributing to economic development, and respecting charter rights. To achieve the project's objectives, several significant changes have been made to the bylaw, the first of which is the overall structure. The bylaw before you tonight has been organized using the Livable Oakville Plan framework for land use designations and mapping. This helped us to achieve objectives of consistency and compatibility by ensuring similar signs are dealt with in a similar fashion in all areas of Oakville. In addition, the Livable Oakville framework provided a guide for compatibility when identifying proper location for the many different sign types. The second major change you'll notice is the format. The bylaw provides most regulations in easy-to-use tables rather than having to search through regulations that may be in the body or the schedules. This format is consistent with the zoning bylaw, and staff believe that it will help make the document more user-friendly. Finally, staff will be providing user guides, which will provide a further enhancement to the end user's experience. And this includes an illustrated online glossary that will be linked to the bylaw. From a process perspective, improvements have been made to the permit issuance and enforcement processes. This includes an addition of administrative penalties and a requirement for sign owners to address fines issued and retrieve seized signs, or the sign owner may no longer be permitted to display signs. The most impactful process changes relates to the seeking of adjustments to the bylaw. In the past, adjustments could only be achieved through a one-size-fits-all variance process. The bylaw before you tonight includes 3 possible avenues to seek an adjustment. The first is an exception. This would be for a minor change to the bylaw and is granted by the designated official. The option allows a customer to apply for up to 10% increase in sign face area or height. The designated official will review the request based on criteria set in the bylaw and may approve or deny the request. The second option is an appeal. This process would be heard by the town's appeals committee. A customer who has applied for an exception and who has been denied, or whose request exceeds the authority of the designated official, can make an application for an appeal. The appeal committee is not able to hear requests for prohibited signs, signs not expressly identified in the bylaw, electronic message boards other than on a ground sign, or for sign face area increases on advertising signs. Neither of these two options apply, then there is a third option. This is an amendment. It would be for requests that are not covered by the first two options, and these would be brought forward in the form of a report to council. Along with functional changes to the bylaw, staff also reviewed many sign types contained within the bylaw. This process has led to some significant changes. The first being a greater use of static electronic message boards, or SEMBs. The current bylaw only permits SEMBs on ground signs for public schools and government institutions, and electronic display of time and temperature in commercial and employment areas. Staff have worked with SEMA Consulting to determine safety and nuisance regulations, along with human factors such as limitations on illumination and display size for legibility. As a result, the bylaw provides for broader use of SEMBs in employment and commercial areas. Illumination has also been quantified with the addition of NIT measurements. This provides more information to the customer and residents and allows staff, it enhances their abilities to enforce violations that are identified. Development sign regulations were also identified as an area of possible improvement. Staff reviewed development signs in detail and updated the regulations. The focus of the review was to ensure that development signs fit within the context and overall lot size and general use of the area. As you will see in the bylaw, the regulations that are developed are now based on land use and lot size. So it's 0.5 hectare, or you have, or less than, and then a 0.5 to 5 hectare and greater than 5 hectare. The review also identifies changes to ground sign regulations, most significantly for those commercial and employment properties with greater than 100 meters of street frontage. In these cases, applicants are now able to obtain an additional ground sign for every 100 meters of frontage, although only one of those signs can be used for an SEMB. Several changes have been made to the temporary and mobile sign categories. Most changes have been made to ensure that the bylaw is current with industry standards. Changes you will notice include new categories for fuel pump signs, pole poster signs, window signs, and feather banner signs. Real estate open house signs were also considered as part of the review. Staff believe that an increase in open house signs did not meet the review objective to maintain the community character, as it could contribute to sign blight and may not preserve the town's unique character. In addition, this request was not supported by the public questionnaire, where 82% of the respondents indicated that 3 was the right number. A report from the Oakville, Milton, and District Real Estate Board is attached to the report. It outlines their request to have the number of open house signs increased from 3 to 5 per open house. In addition, staff also reviewed regulations for mobile signs and concerns identified by the mobile sign lessors. As a result, regulations in the bylaw have been adjusted by removing the requirement for mobile signs to be separated by 30 meters from any other sign. Instead, a new regulation has been added requiring a separation distance of 30 meters from any other mobile or feather banner sign. Feather banner signs and mobile signs have been grouped together for permitting and display purposes in the bylaw. Recognizing that mobile signs and SEMBs have the ability to change copy to meet promotional needs, mobile sign permits would not be issued for properties that have an SEMB. And finally, Joshua Creek Residents Association identified a need for more community mobile signs. The request met the intent of the review, however, it was received late in the process. As such, staff recommended that a review be conducted and a report be provided by the fourth quarter of 2019. And thank you. I'm available for any questions.
Well, thank you. On that very last point, We have a letter from a residents association suggesting that if we added more, if we increase the number of signs, of these community mobile signs permitted in each ward to more than 2, that this would eliminate the need for a feasibility study of more locations. Do staff have a view on that suggestion?
I did have an opportunity to speak to Jill Stevens earlier regarding the possibility of more community mobile signs per ward. I know part of the concern was the timing of the availability of those signs. They were hoping it would be earlier than the fourth quarter. And speaking to them, speaking to Jill, May seemed like a reasonable deadline to have a report brought back to council.
But what I'm asking you about is the alternative of just increasing the number of signs from 2 to 3 or 4.
And that would definitely be part of the feasibility study to find out whether or not it would be reasonable to have 1 or 2 added per ward and the locations of each.
So what's your preference on the matter then?
Personally, it's really just a matter of the need, and that would be part of the feasibility study to assess what the need is, where the need is, possible locations, visibility of those locations. So I would need to see the results of the research first.
Well, let's see what Mr. Barry has to offer.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I'll try not to get the echo. Part of our concern is making sure wherever we locate any additional signs in wards, it's done safely. So we do need the time to actually go out and take a look. The timeline in the report, being the fourth quarter, was set as a maximum timeline. In speaking with Ms. Stevens, we've determined that we can probably do it sooner, but May would likely be the earliest date we could do it to efficiently add the signs and make sure that the corners we use are safe.
So are you asking that we change the word fourth quarter to second quarter?
Through Mr. Mayor, we'd be fine with that amendment.
All right, well, perhaps one of the council members will make a note of that and move that. Anyone else had questions? Councillor Knoll, Councillor Grant? Councillor Knoll, go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. One of the things that I've noted in our ward and across the town is that there are a number of businesses that are, I guess, flouting the law by essentially putting the signs inside their buildings. So SCMBs, stickers, all kinds of different types of signage, and they exceed the allowable signage on the property, and they break the spirit of the bylaw. Has there been any consideration given, or do we even have the ability to be able to regulate the signage that is installed in the windows of businesses and commercial properties to avoid permitting requirements?
Certainly, through you, Your Worship. The proposed bylaw allows for window signs. So there will be permits. It would include any sign on the inside of a window up to 1 meter away from the inside of that window. So that would include many of those sign types.
So some of the businesses that have installed electronic signs in their windows, and there's one around the corner near Iroquois Shore, another one up on Trafalgar, will those fall within the bylaw now as a result of the new regulations? Because neither of these signs would comply in terms of the restrictions on SCMBs, for example. So I'm curious how that would be dealt with.
Through you, Your Worship, yes, they would be included in the bylaw and would need to meet the window sign requirements, which would not include an SCMB. So if they had something that was static, then that may, but not a TV screen, not with moving picture.
So, because up to this point, they were exempt from the bylaw, is that correct?
They were not addressed in the bylaw, so they were not included.
They were not?
They were not spoken to in the existing bylaw, so they weren't included as a permit, a sign that required a permit.
So now all signage, just to be 100% clear, and I apologize for repeating myself because I am still having some difficulty 100% hearing the responses, no offense. But to be clear, so signage on the inside of businesses will be included in the calculation of allowable signage per property, is that correct?
A sign within 1 meter of the window.
Within
would
1
be
meter of the window.
included in the definition
So
of
if
a
it's
window
a,
sign.
if it's a sale sign in the middle of the store, that's not included, but if it's within that period, so that anybody that's trying to usurp those rules is going to get caught in the bylaw now.
If it's within 1 meter, yep.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Grant?
Thank you, and I stand on the shoulders of former councillors like Keith Bird who've protected us from being overpopulated with signage. However, looking at the bylaw and listening to a number of the people in the area, you know where I'm going with this. I sent an email earlier today about when it comes to real estate agents. We have decided that we are going to go with 3, that we're stick with 3 and not go with 5. The concern I have is that, to play devil's advocate, a number of these real estate agents are independent business people who depend on the sales that they get. And we do have very many winding roads. So you've got 2 signs that can go onto an arterial, 1 extra sign that may not actually direct people properly. So I'm wondering what we can do about considering the fact that if there's an area where it is convoluted in a road sense, what we can do about making sure that we can get signs for those real estate agents to get the people to their place. Because, you know, there are times when people drive around and look for places to live, and I see Jim laughing, so I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna look for an answer.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll take this question. The reason that the number 3 was remained in the bylaws because, again, we went out for a survey, heard from over 700 people who identified that 82% of them identified that the 3 was the number. We've also looked at the goals of the sign bylaw review, and maintaining character of stable neighborhoods was one of the main goals that we were looking at. So it seemed to fit that 3 was a number that we should stick with. If we look at moving to 5, using the real estate board's numbers, that's an additional 1,500 signs that we'd be looking at in the community throughout the year. So that's something to take into consideration. All of that said, it's not a safety issue. It's simply a community standard issue. So if council were to direct us to move to 5, there's nothing that I could stand and say, there's a safety issue, or safety reason we shouldn't do it. But again, we do have feedback from the community. We do have the goals of the bylaw and the additional 1,500 signs.
Well, and certainly talking with other councillors, actually I spoke with Councillor Giddings earlier today, we agreed that, you know, given that you believe that there's no safety issue, and given that in the reasoning behind this, you know, there were 2 little wiggle room areas where we were talking about economic development and respecting the rights of business people. Perhaps there is some room to move around and make sure people get more, you know, more availability for signs. The thing is that if we were to try and decide that, look, this is an area where it's difficult to find a home because people might drive around, how difficult would it be to say, okay, well then, if you're in this area, you can have 5 signs. If you're in that area where it seems very clear where to go, it's back to 3. Would that be a difficult way to write a bylaw?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, writing the bylaw would be relatively easy. Enforcing it would be extremely difficult. I would definitely say if we're going to choose to increase to 5, that we increase to 5 both Saturday and Sunday, and as a standard, as opposed to trying to mix the standards.
Thank you. And again, the only reason I bring it up is because the signs are only up for a maximum usually of 3 hours. They're usually very small. And we like to support small business, of course, in Oakville. Thank you.
Councillor Grant, excuse me. Councillor Grant, do you have a copy on your desk of a memorandum?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so the alternative to your line of discussion is Councillor O'Meara's approach, which is to amend the recommendation in front of us and grant 5 instead of 3. So you will have a chance to...
Just want to explore it further. Thank you very much.
All right, great. Councillor Chinna.
Thank you for that report, Ms. Campbell. So I'm on page 6 or 110 of the agenda under the enforcement section. So it says enforcement processes have been updated and streamlined by including orders and administrative fees. So currently we don't have any administrative fees, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So now we're including those, and the next sentence indicates a $100 fee will be charged for a second and subsequent orders. So the first one then is a warning, is that correct?
Through you, Your Worship. Yes, the first one essentially is it's a free order. It's similar to the process we currently use in our lot maintenance bylaw, where if there's an order issued to the same person, same property, and we have to issue a second order, then there would be an administrative fee added at that point. But the first one would not have an administrative fee added to it.
Okay, and so I guess I need a clarification on the $100 administrative fee. So if there's one extra sign, say if it's 3 or 5, if there's one extra sign, and now this is the second warning, so it's $100, is that correct? Or is it per sign?
It depends, I think, on the context that we're looking. So if it's a sign where we've given an order to remedy a problem that's broken or that sort of thing, we have to come back and issue a second order, then the administrative fee would be there. If we're talking about, say, a development sign or a real estate sign where there's a violation, on the first violation there could be administrative penalty issued, which would be essentially a $300 fine.
Sorry,
$300 fine.
$300 fine. And so to me, when I look at this, this is based on our local real estate agents. What if it's an agent from out of town and they come and put their 20 signs up and then they're gone? What happens then, please?
So as part of that enforcement process, officers will go out, they'll look at how many signs are there for one open house, say, and if there's more than what's permitted, they'll remove all of the signs, and the signs then are kept at our facility, and they have to pick them up, and there's a fee attached to the retrieval of each sign. If we have somebody who's a habitual offender, then we may issue the administrative penalty.
And I'm assuming that there's a time limit for these signs, otherwise they get thrown out?
Yes, there is. It's 30 days.
Thank you.
All righty, Councillor Elgar.
Mayor Burton, you mentioned about something that Sean Amira has written. I don't think this side of the table's seen it.
No, we haven't.
And I wonder if we could save a lot of time for everybody, maybe if we had that, if there's a lot of delegations here. I don't know why they like staying here that much, but might be good to throw it out.
Let's see if we can't get that fixed. Councillor O'Meara, do you have copies of?
I don't. I had it sent to me. I can read it out. Perhaps we can put it up on the screen, though. I was going to ask that it be put up on the screen at the appropriate time. I know we still have delegations to go to, but...
Let's share it with everybody.
Okay.
Although, I'm surprised because when I asked if he had it, he said he had it, so. All right. So there you go. I think you can see it now. The new bits are in red and blue. I guess that separates them because they do two different things. So, except for the red, it's identical to what's in the agenda. Councillor O'Meara?
Sorry, and I'm going to speak from back here now. I've learned my lesson. And actually, just to note as well, in number 3, we will be revising, instead of fourth quarter of 2019, second quarter.
Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question for Mr. Berry. Mr. Berry, with respect to the survey, what was the question asked with respect to those signs, real estate signs?
Through your worship, the survey asked specifically, there was a yes/no question associated with that survey, and it was, do you think that 3 is the right number of signs? And if it was no, sorry, as I'm going from my memory here, let me see if I can pull the survey page.
Councillor Giddings?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, I have it here.
Your Worship, can we get the answer for that? Thank you.
Sorry, through you, Your Worship. The town's regulations about open house allows a maximum of 3 open house signs for each open house on the day of the open house. Do you think 3 is the right amount of signs? If no, how many open house signs should the town allow for each open house on the day of the open house? So out of that, the answer for yes was 718 out of 874 respondents.
Does that help you, Councillor Chisholm? Councillor Giddings?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a question. Thanks for the report. We talk about the removal of unauthorized signs. What's not addressed in here are the granite one-day painting, eavesdrop cleaning, Christmas light installing, you name it. And we have detailed options for removal of unauthorized signs, but I don't see these really unauthorized signs talked about in there. I realize that that may be beyond the scope of the report, but could you address that briefly?
Certainly, through you, Your Worship. With respect to the bag signs, essentially there is a section in the seizure of signs that says that they can be disposed of immediately, so we will not keep them for the 30 days. They will be immediately disposed of. If we were to have information or a witness of someone who is displaying that sign, then we may be able to take enforcement action, but unfortunately these things are often done in the middle of the night and there are not any witnesses to this, so we don't know who displays them, so enforcement is an issue.
I understand the difficulty in that, but Mr. Barry mentioned a few minutes ago that if we went with an increased number of signs, it would result in additional 1,500 signs in the community. I would hazard a guess that in Ward 3 alone, some mornings we wake up to an additional 1,500 signs that are zip-tied to poles, glued on the back of stop signs, on the side of community mailboxes, and anywhere else where there's any free real estate. Is there any way that perhaps as part of the report coming back, that a more aggressive way of dealing with this? Because the longer we leave them up, the longer they get away with it and they keep coming. I'm curious whether we can send an invoice or just let them know that we don't really want them popping up all the time.
You're elected, Mr. Barry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Absolutely. Enforcement, as Ms. Campbell has indicated, enforcement is the difficulty because we just don't know who's put them up. And there is issues with, a lot of times you'll notice they say, Joe's something with a phone number. For some reason, they don't like to call us back when we call them and tell us who they are. But we will come back in the report that's coming and provide any further information we can on possible options. Removal is one, although that becomes onerous on the town as well as we chase people to try and remove them. So,
I'd very much appreciate that. I'm also curious whether all the companies that are doing all the work, whether they're licensed contractors that would be of interest.
But we do have our suspicions, right? Councillor Elgar, it's your turn.
Thank you. Mayor Burton, I think we do not have at this point Councillor O'Meara's proposal. That's, as I read this, it didn't do what I thought it was going to do. So is there any way we can get Councillor O'Meara's proposed a bylaw amendment on here?
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand.
Well, if you read what we have here, this is now Councillor O'Meara's, the 5 A-frame signs is what what he wants, correct? Okay, I'm fine with it now, because what I had with me here doesn't have the 5 signs in it. So I'm happy with that.
So as long as everybody's happy, this is just like being dad at my family. As long as you'll be happy, I'm happy. All right. Councillor Adam.
It was rumored to me that some of our worst offenders on the real estate signs were actually realtors coming from outside of Oakville. Do we have any information with respect to the place of business of, I'll say, the infractions that we're getting?
Through you, Your Worship, we do have and have picked up real estate signs both from local real estate agents and agents that are outside of the municipality.
So equal opportunity offending is kind of what you're saying?
I would say so.
Okay, thank you very much. I won't support the 5 change. I believe that we've asked the public. They've given us an answer of 3. We also have information from one of the ratepayer associations from South Oakville, and I'll support that position.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Do we have registered delegates? Oh, Councillor Knoll is next, I guess. We do have delegations, by the way.
Oh, thank you, Worship. I just, as a precursor to what I was going to ask, I'll also indicate, as Councillor Adams, and maybe we won't have as many delegations as a result, but I will be supporting 5 as well, especially in light of the commitment that was made by President-elect Mattis when he was last here, that the organization would pay more attention to enforcing the rules within their own ranks as well. My question relates to the guerrilla signage of town, the stickers, the posters, the signs and such. Have we done a best practices analysis of other municipalities? I heard one suggestion just before we came in the council chamber about what Mississauga does. Have we done a best practices analysis of other municipalities to determine ideas on how we might be able to address this issue? Because this is, I frankly have never had a constituent call me about real estate signs, but I've had lots of them call me about certain roofing companies and certain basement restoration companies and such. So I would certainly be really anxious to know more about other opportunities that exist in other municipalities. And one last thing on that, before I get an answer to the question, embracing the concept of the broken windows concept. I know it's probably a big budgetary hit, sorry, Councillor Adams, but if we were to contemplate a very aggressive campaign of sign removal when they go up, you'll eventually stop, I think, companies from installing them, because if they go up and come down in the same day, and we prove a point, perhaps that would be a strategy as well. Anyway, I would like to know more about best practices, if that's something we've done or if we can do it.
So Councillor Knoll wants to hire a sign sheriff.
Absolutely. Give you a badge, I'll do it.
Get him out there with some glue remover and pliers and cutters.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just on that, some of the most difficult signs, or some of the signs that will give us the most difficulty in something like that, often they'll come with a truck and put them up high. So anything we do, we'll have to hire or have that same equipment to remove them. So there would be significant cost, but we can include that in the report that comes back to speak of. The only thing I'd say about best practice scan, the focus of this bylaw was to be a best practice. So when we initiated the process, and for the last almost 2 years, or actually over 2 years, we've looked at what everybody else is doing and tried to better that. So I think what you'll find in this bylaw, it gives us probably the better options that you're going to find out there. Looking at this issue, can we do something specific for it? We'll bring something back.
Councillor Chisholm.
Just to add to the discussion with respect to the posters and the stickies all on, and the question comes up is most of those signs have phone numbers on it. And I guess we need to have some position or clarity with respect to enforcement. If the phone number's there and we call that number and saying, you've got signs all over the place, is there an enforcement part of that? Can we legally do that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We definitely do that. Unfortunately, most of them hang up on us once we tell them that because we don't know where they are at the other end. Most signs don't have the address now, they just have the actual telephone number, and we can't track that back. So that is a difficulty.
So we're clear on that? Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is going to deter from all of the current conversation. So it is to do with election signs. and it was rumored to me that we were going to be looking at additional penalties for election signs. But when I'm looking at the report, I don't see any changes in any of the election sign penalties or bylaws. And I'm wondering, similar to Councillor Knoll, have we looked at neighboring municipalities to see how they deal with election signs bylaws and what their penalties are in place? I know it's easy to forget because it only happens every 4 years, but when the election period is here, it's quite a nuisance to a lot of residents, and I'm just wondering what was looked into in that aspect. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We did essentially just carry over the election sign section. There were no significant changes made to that section and no additional penalties. We also did have a look at other municipalities. Some have very different styles and requirements for election signs. Some permit, some do not permit election signs on municipal right-of-ways.
Madam Clerk, would you call the registered delegation?
The registered delegation is Oliver Mattis.
Welcome, Mr. President.
Your Worship, Mr. Mayor, esteemed council, valued attendees, and my beautiful daughter who's here to support her dad. My name is Oliver Mattis, President of the Oakville, Milton, and District Real Estate Board, OMDREP, and broker of RE/MAX About Town in Oakville. I'm here to speak on behalf of our 1,800 Realtor members and many of my colleagues who have turned up today. I've included a package for every council member, which I will be referring to from time to time as I speak today. We're asking for the change in the sign bylaws, and thank you to those councillors who are supporting the change from 3 to 5 signs. We feel the sign bylaws as they exist are a very important part of maintaining a livable Oakville, and we understand the 4 guiding principles that our esteemed council is basing their decisions on. Ultimately, we are here to follow the rules, and furthermore, we endeavor to be your advocates to make sure our members follow the rules. However, we feel the rules need to be fair for all residents of Oakville and based on practicality and facts. So I'll talk about 10 points. Point number 1, we feel this bylaw is acting as a detriment to town residents. When selling their most important investment, they are most likely looking for the best exposure possible, which most likely results in them selling their home for the maximum price in the least amount of time. Even though there is so much real estate online, sales do happen often by driving through neighborhoods and viewing homes through open houses. Point number 2, this bylaw unfairly penalizes Oakville residents who are located in small residential streets far away from any main arterial road. I turn your attention to item B in my package I sent you. There are 7 pages. They're just a map, series maps of every ward and chosen streets showing that in every case they need at least 5 signs to direct people on the main arterial road. Even to those residents who don't use a realtor to sell their home, sometimes an open house is their only form of exposure. So in our summation, the current sign bylaws are not fair to any of these residents as their exposure is limited. Point number 3, the town survey was mentioned to a sample of about 800 plus residents that was done previously, which formulated the basis of the current bylaw. We feel was very general. And if you surveyed residents who are actually selling their homes, they would respond very differently. It would most likely want more signs, leading to more exposure, leading them to selling their most important asset at the highest price in the least amount of time. Point number 4, in the interests of community safety, open house signs provide a buyer with clear and effective directions to the property without them having to look at their phone for directions, especially when driving in small residential streets that they may not be familiar with. We feel it is much safer for those residents. It is far safer for buyers to be looking at the directional signs on the road to the open house rather than at their phones for directions. Effective January 1st, 2019, there are going to be very stiff penalties for distracted driving, so people cannot touch their phones at all while driving. Point number 5, Many buyers coming from out of town, usually from Toronto, which is, by the way, the largest real estate board in the world with over 54,000 realtor members. And the data from their board is not always shared with the data from Oakville, Milton, and District Board. We have only 1,800 members. So they may come into town to view a property they know about, but may be exposed to a property they didn't know about because of the open house sign. This is a clear benefit of exposure to the resident who is selling their home. Point number 6. Oakville is the only town in Halton that has a limit on open house signs. I bring to your attention item C in the packages. It's 3 pages, Halton Region sign bylaws. If you look at the bylaws, Burlington, Milton, and Halton Region, under number of signs, there is no mention. You can imagine that is very confusing for realtors from these jurisdictions doing an open house in Oakville. I've received a letter here from the Mississauga Real Estate Board. They're asking their city to increase open house signs to 6 to keep in line what Brampton and Toronto bylaws are currently allowing. Again, we feel our ask of a 5-limit sign is quite reasonable. Point number 7. It has been said by some councillors in the past that increasing open house signs, it will increase the sign clutter, especially at main intersections. We argue that it will not be the case, as the increased signs would only go on the smaller streets. Furthermore, when looking at our stats, there are not as many open houses one would think. I turn to your attention item D, that's 2 pages, where it says open house average and total. Based on our data, we took an actual sample of 4 of the busiest weekends in 2018, 3 from the spring market and 1 from the fall market. As you can see in the bottom right, the entire town averages 6.89 open houses per day. The reality, on a given day, there are not as many open houses as people think. Point number 8, we feel we realtors, who are also mostly residents, are unfairly targeted compared to other industries. And actually, we are supportive of this time limit of putting out our signs from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., no overnight, because it allows to effectively manage every one of our signs on a daily basis. Point number 9, I speak on behalf of my colleagues that to those realtors who break the rules and put up more than 5 signs, who mostly are non-members, there are some members of ours which we're dealing with. Sometimes they put up to 10 to 20 signs. We feel they should be penalized to the full extent of council's power. I have personally aided the town sign bylaw department this past year on a number of occasions by providing them with photo evidence of the specific sign infractions with detailed maps. I've also offered my availability to be called in as a witness to testify against the offending realtors who grossly break the sign bylaw rules. For the overwhelming majority of us realtors who follow the rules, we are in full support of a common sense sign bylaw limit. I turn to your attention item F, which is the Oakville bylaw sign rules. We respect those rules and will endeavor to make sure our members will follow these rules. Finally, point number 10, as realtors, we are the town's ambassadors. Many people come from out of town, and many times the first impression they get is from a realtor. Why? Because the first point of contact is usually through a realtor. This is an opportunity for us to teach them the great things about Oakville, because we know Oakville. We need the signs to direct them to your ambassador, us. So to go back to the 4 guiding principles of the sign bylaw review, 1, health and safety. When putting out our open house signs, we will always consider the interests of safety, especially in small streets where people will look at the road and not at their phones for navigation to an open house. Point number 2, maintaining the community character. We are in full compliance of the size, restrictions, time, and location requirements that the bylaw details, maintaining Oakville's unique character. 3, economic development. We feel that the added exposure of our signs will definitely contribute to the economic well-being of our residents. And finally, 4, respecting charter rights. Our signs will always endeavor to respect the charter's rights and freedoms. Mr. Mayor, Council, we want to be your partners. Be compliant and help you enforce these bylaws. We just feel strongly, and that's why we're here today. Can the realtors please stand up? We feel that 3 open house signs are just not enough and unfair to many residents. We thank those councillors who are going to vote for us for this motion. We ask that the sign bylaws be altered. It will help the residents who are selling immensely. Thank you to the mayor, this council, and thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mattis, for not overselling the point. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you very much. One question, when you're talking about enforcement, your organization, what type of enforcement will you be doing within your own organization? I know the reliance is on the town, but within your own organization, what are you prepared to do?
Well, to start off, you have a really ornery president right here, standing right here. I actually personally call people during the open houses while they're happening. We have a Facebook group that we talk amongst our members, and I actually openly ask them to please call out these people. So we're doing a lot of our own self-policing of signs, and it has been effective. We're still working on it. We realize some members are still not complying, but we are weeding them out.
Thank you.
Councillor Lischina.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Mattis. My question is about best practices for effectiveness of a sign to sell a house. When you go to real estate school, are you advised where to put the sign? So in a corner, away, like on a certain part of a sidewalk, so people can walk by and that kind of thing? So there's standard rules around that?
Sadly, that is not taught in real estate school, believe it or not. And they will agree. That it is not taught, and that would be something that, again, they listen to us for direction as to what to teach and what to talk about. That
so your next seminar is on how to place signs. Mr. Mayor, I do have a question for Mr. Barry when it's appropriate.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Grant, do you have a question for Mr. Mattis?
Thank you, yes. So to you and to anybody who may wish to speak further, looking at number 1, you see that now we are discussing the fact that we will, thank you to Councillor O'Meara, looking at allowing a maximum of 5 frame signs. So you're not punching uphill that much anymore. Neither are the rest of your colleagues. Do you feel that we've done well for you?
I'm happy, yes.
Great. So then, when we're talking about people who come from outside, is there any way that your group can, because I truly believe that you internally try and respect the bylaws, is there any way that you can try and help us control the external influences in this community?
Yeah. Again, I think first off, it's hard for us because again, they are not members of us, so we can't impose any fines on them. We can't do anything.
We can report. We can report.
So again, I've made one of the points of my campaign as my presidency. I've actually started my presidency just on last Thursday, so I'm actually president for this coming year. But one of the points I've made is I'm asking for members to talk to me and let me know the infractions and who is infracting. There are some people, and we all know the names, the ones who have been doing the really reason why I'm here, because they've been causing the problems. See, they've been putting out 20 signs. Hopefully the town is dealing with them. I heard that with some of these people, some of them are Oakville residents, even though they're not OMDREB members, and possibly the town is going after them that way, being that they own a property, they're taxpayers, but I don't know. That's...
Well, let's say we will look after you with the 5 A-frames, and hopefully your group can look after us and report the people who beat that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you very much for coming and for speaking. How much does an A-frame sign cost?
I think about $60.
$60.
I haven't bought one in a long time.
So yours aren't getting taken. Great. I'm wondering if you, and we've had discussions, I know I've had discussions with residents about technology and the use of technology to find houses and these sorts of things. But I'm wondering if you might just pull the curtain back a little bit on the difference between where a house is listed and what agents have access to what MLS boards, and how maybe going into a community, though there are 2 houses on the same street, one would be listed somewhere, one listed somewhere else, and those agents wouldn't be able to know that those houses are there. Could you maybe just explain a little bit of that?
Okay, it's a great question, and this is part of my principal campaign as president. It's about data. So right next to us we have, as I mentioned earlier, the largest real estate board in the world, and I'm saying that in the world, 54,000 members. That's the Toronto Real Estate Board. It goes right out to Mississauga, Brampton, all of Toronto, Durham. Huge, huge. And then we have the Oakville Milton District Real Estate Board. We are part of a collective which is called Ortis, which is a collective of boards kind of west of us. So they're basically Cambridge, right down to Niagara. Hamilton is not part of us, but they are sharing data with us, Hamilton, Burlington. So it's about, and now it's actually grown to 11, and then we're possibly going to be growing even more to a bunch of other boards all around except the Toronto Real Estate Board, okay? So here's the conundrum, okay? So you got many people living in areas like Markham that hear about Oakville and want to come to Oakville. So they employ an agent locally in Markham. And that agent is not an OMDREB member, and they are not connected to our system. They assume that the data is shared, but currently it is not. Currently it is not. And so they come into Oakville. They'll either buy or someone here will employ an agent from outside of Oakville, and they won't list in our local board. So what happens is we agents don't see that information. And the only way to get around it is I actually have to be a member of the Toronto Real Estate Board. So I have to be a member of 2 boards, pay double what many other boards just pay once. So sometimes you'll have a situation like Joshua Creek as an example. You'll have, let's say at a given time, there's maybe 10 detached homes available for sale. On Oakville board, it may show as 6 or 7, and Toronto Real Estate Board will show 10. Typically, Toronto has probably more of the data than we have locally, believe it or not. Now, I've run on a principal campaign to change that. It's in the process of changing, but it's not changed yet. But and that runs around many, many areas. North Oakville, like if you're looking for properties to rent, a lot of it is listed on the Toronto Real Estate Board, but not locally. So it's just, you can't see it. And it just compounds the problems, as we kind of move forward.
So then that, in turn echoes the need for actual visible cues as people are coming into the community. They may not have access to the board, but all of a sudden they see a sign and they go, why didn't you show me this one? Right. Let's go look at that one after. And perhaps that's so when we get to the 5 leading into areas, this would play a major role in the need for visual cues outside of digital. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor, thank you, Mr. Mattis. We appreciate your information. Councillor Lischina, Mr. Barry is available for your questions.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Barry, I'm sorry to harp on the enforcement issue, but we're hoping that that's going to be a huge discouragement for disobeying the bylaw. I'm wondering if staff had considered about scaling up that $100 fee for the second. So first one, you told me is a warning. Second one being a $100 fee, and then seems like subsequent $100 fees. So we're spending a lot of staff time, obviously, dealing with this. Was there any consideration about scaling it up to $200 for the third and $300 for the fourth, or something like that, just to try to get it under control?
And through you, Mr. Mayor, just to clarify, the $100 fee, sorry if you can't hear me, the $100 fee is actually an order fee. So if we're actually giving them an order. In all likelihood, if we're getting persons that aren't complying after, for starters, if we go out and pick up their sign, they have to pay for their sign back. So I heard that it was $60 for a sign, and that's essentially what they would have to pay to get it back. So each time we collect it, they're paying for a brand new sign. That's the first penalty. The second penalty is if we don't get compliance after we've done that, we issue penalty notices. So administrative penalty notices, and they're $300 per notice. So if somebody puts out 5 signs in violation, we could theoretically issue a charge for each sign they've put out. We wouldn't necessarily do that on the first offense, but if somebody's not going to comply, we have the ability to do that. So we can escalate the enforcement.
But you could see where the high rollers wouldn't really care about $100, $300 if they're getting a huge sale on a house in Oakville. So thank you for that clarification.
Councillor Knoll, do you still have something?
I do. A quick question. We've heard a lot about the members from outside of the Oakville Milton Real Estate Board. And correct me if I'm wrong, but our penalties against those people, the administrative penalties as well as the penalties under the PPSA, I guess it is, or whichever act is. I'm thinking it's SR the statutory powers and procedures, SPPA. So I guess those penalties are still applicable to somebody who's not resident or doing business in Oakville, correct? They can still be applied to, they can still be held liable under provincial legislation, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if we, depending on who we're charging, we may act under the Provincial Offences Act so that we can actually issue a charge and take them to court. The administrative penalties are good for people that we can track back in this area. If we can't do that, we would move to a summons to court.
So the actual fine for removing the signs, though, that's not enforceable beyond civil remedies, or is there any enforceability of that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, you mean the collection fee?
The collection fee.
Well, the collection fee, they have to come and pick up their fine, and in this pick up their sign. In this bylaw, you'll find an additional requirement that if a person or an operator does not come and pick up their sign within a certain period of time, all of their signs on town property are then deemed to be illegal. Oh. So we can pick them all up then.
That's interesting. Okay, thank you. That's great.
Councillor Dedek.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. Back to the survey, because I was really blown away by the results of that survey. Was that a random plus an opportunity through our website to provide input, or was it just one targeted?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd probably refrain from saying it's a survey. It was a questionnaire that we put out, so it was on our website and sent out to, and Selena could probably help me out here, but sent out to people that we knew were interested. So it was really random, but it wasn't a scientific survey.
Councillor Hazeltine.
Mr. Barry, could you just clarify for me, I might have gotten confused with all the back and forth, if I put out 6 real estate signs, are you going to pick up all 6 because I'm in violation of the new bylaw, or are you only going to pick up the 1?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we wouldn't know which one was in violation. As soon as you go over the maximum number, whether it's 3 or 6, they're all in violation. We'd pick them all up.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
I sense we might be ready to make a decision. Councillor O'Meara.
Got a sticky button over here, sorry. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, staff, for doing the work. I appreciate it. Over the past number of months that I've been meeting with the real estate community and with residents, I've heard what they've had to say, and I believe that I think we can meet them at their demand. So I'm happy to put forward the amendment that you see in front of you on the screen here. And if you'll bear with me, I'll just read the first part very quickly. It states that Bylaw 2018-153 described in the report from the Municipal Enforcement Services, Planning Services Legal Departments dated November 19, 2018, being a bylaw to prohibit and regulate signs within the town of Oakville be approved as revised in accordance with the memo dated December 10th, 2018 from Municipal Enforcement Services, and that Bylaw 2006-005 as amended be repealed. And secondly, that the updated fees listed. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong one and I just confused you all. See, so we had 2, and I apologize. I can read the one on my screen. I apologize, Your Worship. Let's start that again. We'll skip down to Planning and Legal Departments dated November 19, 2018, being a bylaw to prohibit and regulate signs within the town of Oakville be approved as revised in accordance with the memo dated December 10, 2018 from Municipal Enforcement Services, and to also include a revision to Part 11, signs not requiring a permit, Section 17, to allow a maximum of 5 A-frame signs per property, and that Bylaw 2006-005 as amended be repealed. The second point we add after be approved as revised. And in the third recommendation, that staff be directed to report back to the Planning and Development Council by the second quarter of 2019 on the feasibility of adding community mobile sign locations in each ward.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dedek.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to be about as unpopular as the plague. I will not be supporting the motion. Unfortunately for me, something we pride ourselves at the town of Oakville about is engagement. And when we engage our community and we ask for their input, and we have such overwhelming response from that survey indicating they are not supportive of 5, I have a real problem saying, we want to hear from you, but if we don't like your answer, we're not going to do what you asked in terms of your response. So, as I say, unfortunately, I cannot support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Dudek. Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel, did you want to speak?
I just wanted to ask if we are going to add in the section that said that they'll report back on enforcement strategies for those pesky little bag signs.
I can't hear the last of what you said.
There's the bag signs. We had a discussion about those little bag signs, and that we wanted them to report back on a stronger or more effective enforcement strategy.
There's nothing in the proposal before you, nor in the one in the agenda about bag signs. Mr. Barry, what can you tell us about the councillor's bag sign concern?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe this came from Councillor Knoll, who requested that we look into, that we provide information on a strategy to improve our enforcement of the signs that show up sporadically or regularly throughout our neighborhood advertising small businesses that aren't necessarily here.
Oh, and Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel, you said bad signs, not bag signs? Bad signs?
No, I think I said bag signs, and I maybe it's a protocol.
So he's really talking about the signs that litter our poles and that they're often glued on.
Right. But the motion doesn't say anything about that enforcement, so maybe you can give me some guidance on how we phrase that to make sure we deal with that.
So you can take Mr. Barry at his word that he'll be, in the next phase, bringing that along. Okay. We have long experience with him. We know we can trust him. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for you. I'm just wondering if on point 3, where the staff will be reporting back on the feasibility of adding the community mobile signs, if they can also do some additional work on the election signs penalties, because I do feel it's a concern and that we do need some more information on that.
On election signs, that's a little more charged of a topic. You might want to offer up an amendment to add that to this motion, I think, because I myself am, I don't know if I could guess which way council would go on that, and you might want to think about bringing a request for report or a notice of motion at another time as opposed to this, depending on how far along your thoughts are on what you want.
Okay, so would that be just go on as item number 4? Or would it be completely?
Yeah, you might say, I move that we amend this to add item number 4 to say whatever it is you're out that you want, and we would then vote on that, and if it passed, it would be in the main motion, and if it failed, it would not.
Okay.
So do you want to write something out?
Yes, I'll do that.
We'll take time because we have more speakers. Councillor Grant.
Thank you. I was just going to mention, pardon me, I'm going to be supporting the motion that we have before us. I understand that we did have a questionnaire, but as Mr. Barry mentioned, it was non-scientific. And so basically that's pretty much the same to me as a BuzzFeed questionnaire as to what zodiac sign you have based on what food choices you make. So I believe that, given the reassurances we've gotten from the community who are selling homes, from our realtors, that the 5 A-frame signs will be certainly applicable, and I believe that we will not have any conflict in making sure that's within our community.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Councillor Adams?
On the issue of the bad bag signs and the request for additional information, I just want to try and help a little bit. I believe that in the long distant past, council actually asked for a similar report, and you might start by pulling that up and providing that information as a starting point. I fully agree with the desire to tamp down the number of signs that pop up. They're worse than the dandelions that people complain about at certain times of the year.
Sounds to me like you're going to need sign rangers.
Sign rangers.
With special trucks and equipment.
I'm pretty sure if you just deputized every council member, you'd be okay.
Every citizen.
So with respect to the procedure that we've got here, this is properly on the floor?
I couldn't hear you.
Is this properly on the floor?
It's moved by Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you. So as I said, I'm not going to support...
And actually, yes, that's right. We haven't got an amendment on the floor yet. So right now, this is on the floor, and you're speaking to it.
I am speaking to this. I don't support part one, and so I would ask if we could separate part one. As to what Councillor Dudek said, we've gone out, we've asked the community. They've provided lots of feedback. Sure, it wasn't plus or minus 1% kind of thing, but we went out and asked, and I support our residents on that, and I respect the fact that there are realtors in front of us asking for more. However, in our day and age, I believe that most people can get access to this information online and are able to find the locations. We've had one of the briskest realty industries we've had in years, and it's all happened under the current 3, so I don't think we need the extra.
Thank you, Councillor. So under our bylaw, under our procedure bylaw, any member may, by request, have an item separated so that we vote on it separately, and so we, of course, will do that. And any member can ask for a recorded vote. And you're asking for a recorded vote on item 1? All right. Anyone else over here? Councillor O'Meara?
Sorry about that, Your Worship. I just do want to speak to this issue of a survey, because I completely understand what my council colleagues are saying. But then, if we're going to ask residents what they think about something, we should not be allowed to lead them in the question. And if we mention 3 signs, we have no idea if we would have got the same number if we said 5 signs, or if we said 2 signs, or 1 signs, and hence the unscientific nature of this. Normal survey polling data questions, either politically you're trying to lead somebody down a path, or you're trying to get to an objective. So while I appreciate the outreach that we do, and the list that we had could have been all people who don't like any signs, and that's who we emailed out. So I'm just cognizant of trying to rely on, no, we asked people, general people in Oakville, for a non-biased number, and they all came out with 3. It just doesn't hold water. So I would ask council colleagues to consider that when they're voting on the number 1 amendment, which will be separated from the other 2. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Councillor Elgar.
Let's turn in quite an evening on signs. I'm pleased to support what Councillor O'Meara has brought forward. The only complaints I heard knocking on doors during the election was the disgusting mess we had of election signs on the major arteries. So if I had one thing, they said, you got to do something about the sign bylaw regarding to elections. So,
well, Councillor Palmer is working hard on that over there.
Exactly, I know.
We'll see what she comes up with. Councillor Sandu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually have some questions just along the same line as Councillor O'Meara, specifically around the survey. We said that we emailed people that were interested in this. Mr. Barry, could you give me a little bit more information on how many people we emailed? We heard how many we heard back from, how many people we emailed, and who exactly we were sending emails to.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, I don't have that information with me tonight. What I can suggest is the majority of respondents were just general respondents. The survey was on our website. The people that were contacted were people that had contacted us about a signed bylaw, so we mailed it out to them, which is a fairly small number compared to the overall number that came in. But I don't have exact numbers.
So, sorry, just to follow up to that. So if these are people that are contacting us about the signed bylaw, is it safe to assume that these are people that are against additional signage?
Through Mr. Mayor, they could have had any concern at all. We don't. It wasn't just people that were interested in real estate signs. It were people that had contacted us about the signed bylaw in general. So as soon as we started the review and were reaching out to people that were interested, it included that entire group.
Okay from a survey perspective, but I have a separate question if that's okay, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Just another piece just in the report here. I note that we're saying that we're trying to prevent aesthetic blight, but I'm a little bit confused between that verbiage in the real estate signage piece and then the community mobile signs. Why are we increasing the level of community mobile signs but then decreasing or keeping steady the real estate signs?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess this is really an answer by the numbers. The community mobile signs we're talking about specific locations within wards to put out community information. It's a very small number. As you can tell, right now we're dealing with 2 in each ward, and we may look at 3 or 4, but still a small number. As opposed to saying with real estate signs, that's across the community, on town property, and again, we don't know the numbers. So I think if we're looking at that from a sign blight standpoint, there is more of a community impact with the real estate signs.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. Sorry, one last question, I promise. If we're looking at the addition of potentially 1,500 more signs, the expectation is not that all 1,500 will be out at the same time, correct?
I should speak to the audience. We're in Committee of the Whole, which features relaxed rules, but you might want to think that you're showing your feelings a little too often for your own good. It would be my advice. So, you know, you're in sales, and there's a saying in sales: when you've sold, stop selling. So let's see how this goes. Councillor Sandu is owed an answer to her question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would suggest that from the information the realtors have provided, they wouldn't all be out at the same time.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Berry, for your patience.
Alrighty, now I saw a forest of hands over here. Councillor Robertson?
I just have a question about whether election signs were actually on that survey.
Sorry, bear with me while we check the survey. Through you, Mr. Mayor, they weren't on the survey, and I would suggest that I believe it was about a year and a half ago, or maybe less, that the election signs were reviewed. Council did make a decision on that, which is one of the reasons we didn't come forward with new regulations. You'll notice all we've done in the proposed bylaw before you tonight is taking out the portion of the election signs that deal with collecting the signs and put it in a general section. So it actually reflects Council's decision of a short time ago.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Berry. All right, Councillor Lischina.
I'm sorry, can we get that question read one more time about the signs that Ms. Campbell wrote or said earlier? The question about the real estate signs.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The town's regulations about open house signs allow a maximum of three open house signs for each open house on the day of the open house. Do you think 3 is the right amount of signs? If no, how many open house signs should the town allow for each open house on the day of the open house?
Thank you. I take that as a statement of fact that currently there's 3 signs, and whether you agree, and you have the opportunity to put more or less. So I don't think it was a leading question from my standpoint.
Thank you, Councillor Lischina. Councillor Palmer, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Yeah, and I do, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do echo Councillor Elgar's points where the only complaints I did hear during the election from residents was that they weren't going to be voting because they were so disgusted by the amount of election signs. So I wouldn't want us to continue a process that is deterring our residents from voting. So therefore, I move that staff report back on best practices regarding election sign penalties and periods of display.
So your introductory remark indicates that you're concerned about there having been too many. Is that right?
Yes, too many, and sign locations, signs being placed in areas that they're not permitted.
Okay. So you wrote that out, your motion?
Yes.
And could one of the clerks bring it up? I'd just like to see it first. Then I'm going to send it over there. So, if you put that up in very bad handwriting, I've added, to be helpful, a phrase which I'll invite you to look at, and the numbers allowed to be, I've forgotten already the words I put, but do you see what I added?
Yes.
Does that help you get to what you want?
Yes, and numbers of signs allowed. Yes, I'm okay with that amendment.
Okay, Madam Clerk, would you put that up now for everyone? And this would be item 4, and it's a motion to add number 4 to this. And so there you go. So let's understand that if this passes, it gets added as item number 4. And can everyone read it satisfactorily? That staff report back on best practices regarding elections, sign, penalties, and periods of display and numbers of signs allowed. We're all good on that? Any discussion? Mr. Barry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I wonder if we could put a timeline on this, just considering the work we have underway next year. I'm wondering if something like this could come back in the fall.
I think, considering the topic, that if you do it in the next 2 years, it'll be soon enough. I mean, that still leaves 2 more years before the election. Councillor Adams, do you have a contrary thought?
I have no contrary thought. I only was going to suggest to staff that it's in their bailiwick to provide a response time when we don't give one. It's in their power to suggest a time frame to come back when we don't give them one.
I think he's happy with
yes.
this.
So,
all right. May I call the vote on Councillor Palmer's amendment? Councillor Duddick? Oh, you're going to vote? I'm just going to say the words, all those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Palmer, congratulations. You've passed your first piece of legislation as a councillor.
Thank you.
All right. Now, may I call the votes on the remaining? Councillor Chisholm, you had your hand up earlier.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Back to number 1. I'm in support of number 1. I'm not convinced and not comfortable with the question that was asked in the survey when it's leading on the number 3. If we replace it with 5, you probably might have had the same response. So I'm not comfortable with the survey question with the leading of 3 signs. Honestly, if you put 5 signs down there, they would have said that would have been fine. That's my personal opinion. Thank you.
Thank you for your opinion. All right. Councillor Adams has requested that we vote on item number 1 separately and that we have a recorded vote. So if it is your desire to support item number 1, to vote for it, please rise to be named by the clerk. And Councillor Sandu, Councillor Palmer, Councillor Lischina, Councillor Grant, Councillor Knoll, Councillor Longo, Councillor Elgar, Councillor Haslett-Thiel, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Chisholm, Councillor Robertson, Councillor O'Meara, and Mayor Burton. It's close. Now, to be registered against it, please rise to be named. Councillor Adams and Councillor Duddick. Like I said, it was a close fight. Thank you, everybody, for that. May I put the vote on the rest of the motion by hand? All right, so all those in favor of 2, 3, and 4, the rest of the main motion, please raise your hands. And any against, and that carries. Thank you, everybody. We made a decision. We have a new decision before us, item number 8, which is the notice of intention to demolish 1158 Burnhamthorpe Road East. There's a report from the Planning Services Department. Susan Schappert is, I believe, here if you require a presentation. I believe that you'll find that the report's quite thorough. Councillor Duddick, do you want to? Councillor Giddings? Who am I going to put on the spot here for a motion?
I'd be happy to move the staff recommendation for item number 8, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there questions about it? May I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Item number 8 is carried. Now, we have a heritage designation bylaw at 3451 Tremaine Road. Again, there's a presentation from Susan Schappert if required. Before I go too much further with this, we have no registered delegation that I know of. Are there members of the public with information for council on this file? Wave your hand or otherwise indicate your presence. Second, third time. All right, I'm confining it to table. Councillor Duddick.
Be pleased to move it, Your Worship.
Thank you. May I put the vote? All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. That brings us to number 10. And this is the Bill 139 update, the Toronto Rail Deck Park stated case. And this is a wonderful report that I'm sure you've all read. I'm strongly in support of this, as you might guess, and I would suggest to you that we have a good record when we intervene like this, because in the Parkland dedication case with Richmond Hill and Markham and Vaughan, we, in a sense, went all the way to the Supreme Court in that the Supreme Court refused to review the Court of Appeal decision. So let's feel encouraged by that to join with our friends in the City of Toronto, because what's going on here is an effort to subvert Bill 139 by adding information at the first stage of appeal when Bill 139 was supposed to be an administrative review of Council's decision and ought to be restricted to the information that Council had when it made its decision, not adding in a bunch of new information. So I'm sorry for speaking in favor of it like that. I should be more neutral, but Councillor Elgar wants to move it.
Absolutely, that's a great thing to do.
Sorry, Mayor Burton, may I ask a question before we go to vote?
I beg your pardon?
May I ask a question before we go to vote?
You certainly may at any time.
Thank you. Just a very quick question. Can we just assuage some of my confusion on this? What are the consequences of non-intervention?
I would again like to refer this to my colleague, Ms. Chandra.
Can you hear me? Through you, Mayor Burton, to members of council. The issue I did want to bring to your attention, there is a regional report going to Halton Council on December 19th recommending intervention at the regional level, as well as any interested local municipalities. If there are no interveners, then it would be the City of Toronto that will be arguing an issue that does transcend the Rail Deck Park decision.
What's our actual consequence if we do nothing and Toronto then loses?
This decision does have implications for all Planning Act appeals, including Oakville's.
Thank you, that answers my question.
Or in my way of putting it, this is really, really big and important. And I hope that we'll pass it and thereby encourage our colleagues at the upper tier of our municipality to also pass it. A recorded vote is always in order on request. Is there more questions or discussion? May I put the vote? To be registered in favor, please rise to be named. Councillor Sanju, Councillor Palmer, Councillor Lischina, Councillor Adams, Councillor Grant, Councillor Knoll, Councillor Longo, Councillor Elgar, Councillor Haslett-Thiel, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Chisholm, Councillor Duddick, Councillor Robertson, Councillor O'Meara, and Mayor Burton. I declare the motion carried unanimously. And thank you, everybody. The next item is the Cultural Heritage, number 11, the Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategy, Phase 2, Aircliff Estate, 8 Navy Street. There's a presentation from Ms. Schappert, if required. No known registered delegations. And are there any members of the public with information for council on this item? I see none. Mr. Carr, you had your hand up.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, to jump in perhaps a little late, but just to achieve clarity on item 10, which you just voted on, I think it would be helpful if council were to read out the resulting resolution, which is set out in the confidential memo, because all that's in the public right now is that the report be received, and we understand from the debate that you were endorsing what's in the confidential.
Okay, yes, thank you. We'd gladly do that, just as soon as the clerk produces it. All right. What we just passed is that the town solicitor be instructed to intervene, which may include joint intervention with the Region of Halton or other local municipalities in any proceedings relating to the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal decision PL 180210 regarding the rail deck park stated case or other proceedings raising the same issues as set out in the report from the legal department dated November 13th. And 2, that the town clerk forward a copy of the public report from the legal department dated November 13th, together with the council resolution, to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, the Ministry of the Attorney General, Halton's MPPs, the parties to LPAT decision PL 180210, the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, Halton Region, the City of Burlington, the Town of Halton Hills, the Town of Milton, and the Association of Municipalities of Ontario for their information. Thank you for that reminder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'm very glad to have read that out. Now, on to Aircliff's estate. Councillor Giddings, perhaps. What is council's pleasure on this matter?
I see no need for a presentation myself. If any of my council colleagues would, excellent, but I'd be happy to move it, Mr. Mayor.
All right. So for the public's benefit, it's moved by Councillor Giddings that the Cultural Heritage Evaluation Report from Planning Services be endorsed and that Aircliff's estate be recognized as a significant cultural heritage landscape and move into Phase 3 implementation of protection measures. Councillor Chisholm?
Thank you, Worship. I have a question of staff with respect to the landscape strategy. Recollection, do we not have a heritage easement agreement with the province? And how does that impact this with the standing easement agreement we have with the province? And I understand we did that years ago because of the work we did on Aircliff's estate. Could you comment, please?
Yes, certainly. Through you, Mr. Mayor, the implementation of the Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategy will not have any impact on the heritage easement agreement that currently exists between the town and the Ontario Heritage Trust. In fact, the two documents should work together very well. But as we move forward with implementation of protection measures, we will endeavor to keep our colleagues at the Ontario Heritage Trust involved in any bylaw updates that may come forward as a result of this to make sure that both of those documents are working together, which I am confident they will.
Thank you. Councillor Giddings.
If I could, Mr. Mayor, it was May of 1976. It's timely with the passing of Mayor Barrett that this is coming forward. It was May of 1976 that I believe it was $550,000 that was put forward for that. A little controversial at the time, but yet another example of saving from a plan of subdivision, thanks to Mayor Barrett.
Yes, he did a lot for our town, and he's sorely missed. I'm very glad to see this. It means that the Cultural Heritage Landscape strategy that we adopted in livable Oakville all the way back in 2009 is really moving along, and we're getting after all of them, and I'm very pleased to see that. May I call the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we have item number 12, the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee, we need a motion that the following recommendation pertaining to items 6A, B, and C of the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee minutes from its meeting on November 27th be approved and the remainder of the minutes be received. And A is a new garage addition at 22 George Street. Excuse me one second. And B is the alterations to an existing residence at 214 William Street. And C is the incorporation of a historic building into a new development. I need a mover for this. Councillor Duddick, may I call the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is carried. Now, we need a motion to rise and report to council. And Councillor Lischina, thank you. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, that carries. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent items 1, 2, 3, and 4, confidential consent item C1, public hearing item 5, discussion items 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, and item 12, advisory committee minutes as noted by the clerk. May I have a mover and seconder for the adoption of the report? Councillor Grant and Councillor Knoll. All those in favor? Opposed, if any. The report is adopted. And I wonder if I could have a mover and seconder for the bylaws. Councillor Longo and Councillor Elgar, thank you. This is a motion for the bylaws as listed in the agenda and as revised in the case of 2018-153. That's the sign bylaw that we worked so hard and long on. May I call the vote? All those in favor? Any opposed? The bylaws are adopted. That completes our work, that finishes the agenda. I want to say how great it's been working with you, and we are adjourned. Thank you very much.